Living my bucolic life, free of the city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful are houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello. So here is our pattern for today. Get to focus. It is a simplicity pattern, and this has a short dress, a long dress, and a pant jumpsuit. Not going to make the pant jumpsuit. I can't get into having to totally undress when I use the bathroom. So it looks adorable, but I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to probably do something between the length of the really long dress and the shorter dress, depending on how much fabric I have. And it calls for, it says batik, chambray, cotton blend, gauze, gingham, light denim, light blends. Light fabrics. That's what it wants. And I have this gauze. It's cotton. Kind of ugly color, isn't it? This is a gauze that I had bought. Didn't like the color, so I put it in with some dye. It came out a terrible color. So I threw it in with some other dye, and it's like this. So I think that for this type of a pattern, it's going to be fine. There might be a few spots as we look at it that the dye is not completely even, but that doesn't bother me. And if it does, when I get to the very end, I can re-dye the entire dress ready-made. So with that, what we're going to have is a whole lot of buttons, some pleated pockets, and things like that. So I'm going to get started cutting it out. All right, so I have gotten most of my pattern cut out. You know, it's been a long day. I had to do a whole bunch of things, but I just thought I'd jet back in here. But before I get started really in earnest here, I wanted to go over a couple things. And first of all, just getting a close-up of this fabric. This is double gauze. And all right, so that is a edge shot of it. What double gauze is it's basically 2 layers, so hence the double word. All right, so I can pull it apart. What I'm going to do is where it's going to focus on it. I can pull it apart, and there's 2 separate layers of gauze, and there's little basting threads that hold it together. Okay, so because of that, you have to do a little bit of thinking of how you're going to handle it. And the first thing is you have to decide how you're going to work with your fabric. Because as you can see, this is a scrap here. Very, very crinkly. Okay, now this makes it very soft. And it's very comfortable to wear because there's so much air in between the layers and everything like that. But very, very wrinkly. So there's 2 options, and you kind of have to pick which one you're going to do and then stick with it the entire process. So either you're going to iron your fabric out and then, make sure that your patterns are cut around it carefully and everything's sewn carefully for everything. Or you're going to embrace the wrinkleness of it and just kind of very carefully pin it and work with it as the wrinkles are and just try to embrace that whole wrinkly vibe of it and everything that way. And at first I was thinking that's what I was going to be doing. So I just cut everything out. Sorry about that. I just cut everything out with the wrinkleness to it. And then I was realizing that whole front placket, and there's a neckband, which we'll deal with, that is going to need to be interfaced. And I was looking at doing a sew-in interfacing, but actually I want to use a fusible. And so because of that, I'm going to, as I get my pieces out, I'm going to go ahead and press them and trim up around the edges of my pieces. Now, when I iron them, it'll make it flatter while I'm working on it. But the first time I throw it back in the wash, it's going to re-crinkle itself. So I think that's my goal here, is to go ahead, and I'm not going to, iron it completely flat, but I'm going to iron it enough that I can make sure that the size of the piece I want is what I'm going to get, more like just justifying the edges, making sure that it's where it's supposed to be. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, if you're ever going to be sewing with this stuff, it can snag really easily. It can fray really easily. So make sure you finish your edges, with a serging it, French seaming it, zigzagging it, whatever. But make sure all your seams are finished off somehow, or it's going to fray everywhere. And it is thicker. It has 2 layers in it, and when you have sewing 2 layers together, you have 4 layers here. So if you do have a walking foot on your sewing machine, this could be a good project to use for it. I don't have a walking foot that works on my machine, and so another option is on the very top of the machine, there's a little knob that you can unscrew a little bit, and that takes some of the pressure off of the presser foot up against the feed dogs, okay? And by releasing some of that pressure, not a whole lot, but just some of the pressure, it's going to make a really fluffy fabric want to feed through a little bit more evenly. So that's what I'm going to be doing. And I think that's about it for what I wanted to talk about. So I'm actually going to call it a day in here today. I'll start out again tomorrow. But I just wanted to give you, while I had it on my mind, how we're going to work with our double gauze. See you tomorrow. So, slept on it, and actually what I'm going to be doing is kind of a hybrid of pressing everything first and embracing the wrinkle, because I don't want to iron all of this. I kind of like the wrinkly look. And I've been practicing on my machine, the machine I'm going to be using. My regular machine is in the shop for its annual service and everything, so I'm using my backup machine, which takes getting used to, of course. And I've been playing with a scrap, and I think that if I just feed it through with both hands on side of the needle, I can kind of work those wrinkles in pretty easily. And also I'm thinking that because it is a double gauze, when I fuse an interfacing to it, I'm going to be using a very lightweight interfacing. So it should actually want to kind of assume that texture again after I wash it. But I'm only going to be fusing it to one of the layers, not both of them. So theoretically, the inside layer is the only one that's going to have the interfacing fused to it. The outside layer is not. So I think I should be able to have a good look that way. So we're just going to go for it here. Now, this is a pretty simple pattern overall, but it does have some interesting things to it. It has this pocket up here. So the first thing we're going to be working on is the bodice front. And I have to mark all of these pocket placement positions. And down here, hang on, move up, morning light coming through here. Down here, there's a buttonhole mark, and that's where the drawstring comes through. So one of the first things we're going to have to do is make that buttonhole, which I'll do over at my treadle, of course. So let me go ahead and with my scrap of leather and hole puncher, I'm going to go ahead and mark out all of my dots. So what I do is I stick my leather underneath the tissue paper, but in front of the fabric, and then I can just push straight down on my hole puncher and it punches it out. Let's get it over here. Okay, so that way when I come back with my typical heat erasable marking pen, I can just color in my little circles here. And I have my placement. So I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm actually going to punch out a hole at the top and the bottom of this little buttonhole mark. And that's going to give me my starting and stopping position for the buttonhole that I'm going to be making. So that's how I mark it. Usually I will clip my notches because this stuff frays so easily, and I don't want to give it an extra opportunity to fray later by having a little notch in there. I'm actually just going to be marking my notches. So let me go ahead and throw a couple lines over here, and that's basically how I'm going to be marking the whole garment as I go. So okay, so the first thing I need to do is reinforce this neckline, and I am going to be using my woven stay tape. And when I'm ironing this, I'm going to try to be careful to only press down and not wiggle, so that I'm not stretching out the fabric any more than I have to. Okay, so I have this stay tape fused on. Now let's see what it looks like on the right side. So on the right side, you don't really see a line or anything with it, and so I think that we're going to be fine with fusing lightweight interfacing to the back side of this. So I'm going to do both sides of the neckline, and down here where we're going to be putting our buttonhole, there's two little dots here. On the back side of that, I'm going to need to put a interfacing also. Now, as soon as I iron that, those little dots are going to disappear, so I'll redraw those as soon as I'm done. For the buttonhole, I just used a little snip of that tricot tape, fusible tricot tape, to put over it because it's very soft, it's very flexible, but it's going to give me the stability that I need. So, again, with my interfacing, I try to make sure that it is at least the same weight or lighter than my actual fabric, because I don't want it to change the appearance of the outside of the fabric, just give it stability. So I think we're good. I need to remark these buttonholes and go make them. Alright, so I did try this out on a scrap ahead of time just to make sure my needle and tension and everything is fine, and it is. And I decided that I'm going to be making my buttonholes slightly longer than in the pattern. In the pattern, it's 1/2 inch or less, and that just seems like a really small buttonhole for a really bulky drawstring to go through. So I'm actually making mine a little bit more than like a 5/8 inch buttonhole. And if you're curious about my buttonholer, I do have another video of just explaining it out there, so you can always go to that and see. But come on, clip. All right, so got it on the reinforcement down there, and see those two dots are where they wanted me to make my buttonhole. I made it taller, and I made it more towards the body of the fabric, so that way I know I'd have room for it. So I'm going to go ahead and make my other one, cut those open, and go back to the table. Okay, the next piece I'm going to be working on are these pockets, large pockets. So I have placement circles here. There's one in the center where I think a button is going to go, and then we have these two long broken lines, and I'm going to just mark the tops and bottoms of those lines here, and then move this and just connect them with my pen. Okay, I'm going to do this to both pockets. And once I have them both marked, what I'm going to need to do is fold this in half, matching up these two lines. I need to scoot that over a little, don't I? Okay, matching up these two lines. And we're going to be stitching that just to hold it in place. In normal fabric, I would just use a machine basting stitch across there, but since this is so odd and so easy to snag, I am just going to hand baste it with needle and thread, because I think that'll be less marring on the fabric and easier to pull out. So that's my next step. Okay, so this is my basting stitch here, and what I need to do now is open this up flat and press it so it's like that all the way down. Now once I press it, what it wants you to do is do a little stitch across the top to hold it still, and I'm going to do that. But I am also going to be fusing this 1-inch wide tricot tape across the top. It's going to do a couple things. It's going to reinforce this and keep it from moving, because this fabric is a little, it doesn't want to be a tailored fabric. It wants to be a drapey fabric. And with the exception of this pocket, it's a drapey pattern, but this pocket is very pleated. So that's going to give it the structure that I need to be able to keep this pocket top formed the way I need it to. So let me go ahead and do that. All right, so I have fused the tape and across the top of my pockets, and there was a little bit extra, so I went ahead and put it at the bottom too to hold that. Now here's another thing that I need to show you. On this fabric that wants to just stretch like crazy because there's so much ease built into it, the first pocket I just serged normal going around. And you can see when I get to the corners, it's a little bit lacy, got that lettucey look to it because I wasn't paying attention. So on the second pocket, if you have a serger, and they're all a little bit different, but I want to show you, on mine, in here, there's a little adjustment you can make. If it's up on top, it's for a stretch. If it's in the middle, it's, status quo, all is good. And if it's low, it makes a gathering type of stitch, okay? So what I'm doing while I'm going to be working on this, because just what I think would be normal is going to be wanting to make a lettucey effect, I'm going to be shifting it down to gather. And that way, as I stitch it, if it's thinking it's gather, if the stitches are wanting to gather it while the fabric is wanting to stretch it, then I should end up even. So let me finish this corner up here and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is just a quick comparison here. This is the one that I serged with it regular, and I can make this work, okay? I can do that, and I can ease in my corners and everything, but you can see it's a little more lettucey, or at least I hope you can. This is the one I did with, I think, where was I? I was halfway down one of the rows when I decided, oh, I need to change this. So you can see the bottom on this one is a lot flatter, all right? And I think that's going to work for me. And I wanted to show you, this is the original down here. I've redrawn my dots where I'm going to be making this fold at the very edge of my tricot tape. And that's because the tape itself is going to help me have a nice tight fold, and adding an extra 1/8 of an inch to the bottom is not going to make any difference at all. So just letting you know I'm doing that. Now I'm turning under the top edge here, and having this tricot tape will hopefully keep it from not wanting to stretch any more out of shape than it already wants to. So I'm pressing that under 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to come back and stitch it down all the way across on both pockets. Okay, so this is my backup machine I'm using today. It is a 1953 Singer Model 15. And they're kind of cool because they have like this direct drive motor that doesn't use a belt or anything, so it's kind of a workhorse type of a straight stitch machine. So what I need to do right now is ease in all of these edges here so that I can curve it under and press it down so it'll have a nice edge. So I'm going to do that finger crimping thing, and what I do is I set my stitch to a longer stitch length, and I'm going to be running my stitches just inside my serging line. Put my finger back behind my presser foot to try to hold it down and up against the presser foot really tightly. Come on. And just let it bunch up as much as possible before you have to let go. Turn it here. Okay, I'm just going to go straight across to the next one And now start it again over here. Oops, turn this a bit. Okay, so pulling it out, I should have these nice little crimpy corners here like that. So then I can just tuck them under and I will have a nicely shaped edge. And on the inside, that stitch line I just did is going to gather it and hold it all in nicely this way. Okay, so I'm going to do the other pocket the same and go press them. Okay, and I'm also right now going to just do this little stitch from my dot straight down at a 5/8. Looks like it's marked at a 5/8 inch seam allowance on both sides of each pocket. And then I will be clipping the corners a bit and flipping those right side out. Now I'm pressing my pocket, and I wanted to show you this little thingy. It's a pocket pressing template. It's a Clover brand, and it's got different shaped corners, which comes in handy. So this one kind of matches up with what we've got here. So I can tuck it into the corner and I'm going to press it. Now it comes with this little thing here that's supposed to kind of let you hold it in place like that so that you don't burn yourself. And I usually actually don't use that. I just kind of put it in there and hold it down. But what that's going to do is help you have symmetrical corners so that the one side is the same shape as the other side. So you don't need it. It's not, mandatory, but it does really help. And if you don't have one of these, you can try to cut a corner out of like maybe a piece of cardstock, like a manila folder type thing or something, just to slip it in there for while you're pressing. Because it does really help to have a guide in there when you're making your corners, or else one could end up a little more pointy and one more round and everything. So anyhow, there's the one pocket. I'm going to press the other one. Okay, so again, ignore the coloring. I definitely will be redying this dress. But anyway, what I need to do before I can attach my pockets to my bodice is to put buttons on them. And I think I'm going to use these. These are some of the buttons that I pulled off of my army coat when I was redoing it. So I think that that's going to work. It's kind of like a greenish brown color. So I'm going to be putting a button at the center point of each of these pockets, and then we'll place the pockets onto the blouse. So if you haven't seen before, the way I put on buttons, and I'll just show this once, there's a lot of buttons on this dress, is I pull both tails through the eye of the needle. Okay, find my thimble, there it is. And then I'm going to be sewing this so that I'm using this doubled part here as my reinforcement. Right about there. Okay. So then I can just stick it straight down and come back up where I need it to be. Just making sure I have it set to start with really well here. And then when I come back up, I just slip my needle through that loop and it's secure. So now I can go ahead and finish stitching it on. And I have a doubled thread, so that's nice and strong. And I'm using my Secura buttonhole thread, or button thread again. It's got like a fusible bond coating it. And that way, after I sew it on, and I'll, do my little way I make my knot and everything, but when you iron it, it kind of makes the threads glue together, so there's less of a chance it's going to ever come out. Okay, so now I've done a couple stitches in each side. I'm going to bring my needle back up underneath. Whoopsie. I pulled my needle off, but pretend I didn't pull my needle off. Wrap it around twice, and then I'd stick my needle straight through and pull it, and then clip it. And that way there's no knots. No bulk or anything like that. It's a nice secure button. So then I'll just touch this with the iron and it's going to fuse those threads in. So now it's time to place our pockets, and there's 2 dots up here. The top one's going to be for the overlap. The bottom one is where we match up the corners of the pockets. So I am just going to pin it in place and come back and top stitch it on. I was thinking of doing it invisibly. There's a trick that you can do where you can sew it so there's no seams that are seen. But I think I'm going to save that for a more stable fabric. With this one, I don't want to risk stretching it out of shape any more than I possibly can avoid. So I'll do that a different time. So this time, I'm just going to really closely top stitch it all around the edges here. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is the little flap that goes on the top of that pocket. And what you have to do is just sew down, over, and up. I am not going to be interfacing this, just my own personal choice here. But I want to point out, it doesn't really spell it out on the directions or anything, but you can tell the size seam allowance you need by the little dot. And the center of that dot is 3/8 from the edge. So instead of a 5/8 here, we're going to need to do a 3/8 inch seam allowance when you're sewing this. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, leaving the top open. Alright, so I've made my little upper flaps. I have serged across the top just to keep that from fraying, in addition to the stitch that they call for on the pattern. Now I need to mark where I need my buttonhole to start. So I'm just going to remark that and the top one, and then I can just draw a line between them, and that's going to give me a good direction. So how I mark it is I make sure I have like a cross point where I can start my needle, because my buttonhole is going to run on a certain track, but I need that initial point and the direction line marked. Okay, so I have my buttonholes made. I actually ended up having to put tracing paper on top and bottom because the stuff snags so easily. It was going to snag on the bottom of my buttonhole foot. But I used my little chisel and a scrap of leather to cut those buttonholes open. And now I'm ready to attach them. So I'm going to take a top, and the two top dots here, they are the ones that are going to be matching with these top dots right here. Okay, so, and those top dots should be at the edges now. So basically I'm putting it so that the little dots on my blouse are on the outside edge of my little pocket pieces here, and I'm just going to pin it on and stitch straight across, straight between those dots. So let me get this pinned here and I'll show you where that stitching line will be. Okay, so there I have it pinned straight across. So what I'm going to do is get a little ruler, and I'm going to draw a line between those two dots so that I can see it easily. And then with my sewing machine, I'm going to come back and stitch straight across there. And I'll do that on both sides. Okay, so I have this seam sewed, and I went ahead and I clipped these two corners right now to get that excess out of the way so it wouldn't want to peek out here and be all visible. And before I top stitch it, I wanted to go ahead and button it, make sure everything is good. Yeah, and so I press this down and then come across here and stitch it. And you can see on this one I have that stitched. So this is finally done. I need to pop these basting stitches open so that I can still get to this pocket. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I just realized I did the pocket inside out. So I have a box pleat instead of the other way around. Wow. Can't believe I did that. Anyhow, that's just the way it's going to go, I guess. So as you can see on here, they have it so that the pleat is on the outside, and I have my pleat on the inside. But you know what? We're just going to go with it. We're going to pretend that's the way it's supposed to be, and you can do it this way or the other way. Such is life. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and pull my little basting stitches out here. And you can see the pleat the way I have it done. So here's the thing. If you're doing it the correct way, you'll just flip your pocket the other way when you're sewing everything. You can do everything the same steps, but just Instead of this way, do it that way, if you know what I mean. So anyhow, I don't think it matters that much. It's just a style issue. And we'll just call this a personalization. So there you go. I'll clip that thread with scissors. But anyway, that's the way my pocket's going to be opening. I think it's fine. And I'll be doing that on both sides. Alrighty, so moving that front pieces aside for right now, I'm going to work on the back for a minute. Now in the back, again, I'm going to use my stay tape and reinforce my neckline with that. And then I'm going to be sewing this center back at 5/8. I'm going to come back after that and serge these edges. And again, I have my serger set at that gathering setting, so that hopefully between the stretch of the fabric and the gathering of the thread, I'll have a nice even seam here. But normally I will serge around the edges of everything first and then sew it. I'm actually doing it the opposite way, where I'm sewing it and then serging it, and I will be serging both sides together just because of the fabric that I'm working with. If I was using a typical woven fabric that did not have all of these issues that this gauze does, I would be serging around the edges and then sewing it. So you kind of have to make your judgment based on the fabric that you're using. So anyhow, I'm going to go do that, put my tape, sew this seam, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have that part done, and I am now pinning the top pieces to my bottom. So here's my bottom. You can see this is the seam. Just ignore the different colors again, okay? So here's my seam for my back, and I have the stay tapes fused to my back. All right, and I'm just pinning the top and the bottom underneath the arms of these, and I'm going to be sewing here and up here at 5/8, and then I'm going to be coming back and again serging both of these edges on both sides. So I need to make the casing to put the elastic in the sleeve. I'm using 1/2" elastic. What I'm going to be doing is folding up about an inch. You know, it doesn't have to be exact, but about an inch. And I'm kind of using my ham here just to roll it around. And the seam allowances I'm pressing towards the back. So this is the front side here. Alrighty, so that's the front side there. So I'm going to press the whole thing towards the back. And the same with the upper seam and the lower seam. So once I have this initial seam, I'm just going to tuck under. It says to tuck it under about 3/8 of an inch, but I want to make sure I have plenty of room for my 1/2" elastic to go through there. So let me grab the elastic here. Okay, just to show you what I mean. So so let's say this is my elastic, and that's where my stitching's going to be. I'm just barely going to have enough room for it to go through here. This is just how I gauge how much I'm going to do. So actually, I'm only going to tuck it in maybe about 1/4 inch. And I think that that's going to give me a better sized casing to be able to pull my elastic through along with the bodkin that I'm going to use. So if my stitching's here, that's going to give me about 1/16 of an inch on each side. Perfect. So let me go ahead and press these casings down all the way around, and then I will start stitching at the underarm seam, and I will go over the seam all the way around and leave my opening on this side of it. Okay, so I'm ready to put my elastic in. Now a lot of times I will stitch down my seam allowance or use stitch witchery to stitch it down. I didn't do it this time because hopefully I'm going to be going the correct direction. Now, since I have them both pressed towards the back, one of them will be hard to get to. And that's why I left my opening here right next to it. Because even though this side is hard to get to, since my opening is so close to it, I should be able to figure out how to get through there, without too much trouble. So I'm going to go ahead and thread my elastic through all the way. I'm going to anchor it down over here just to keep it from wanting to go anywhere while I'm pulling. And when I get back all the way around, I'm going to just stitch it together by overlapping it. Okay, so really quick, I am just whip stitching the edges of my elastic together. Up one side and then back down the other side, and I'll tuck it in. And then also with just a needle and thread, I'm going to close up the gap up there. Now, there's something about this whole project that if I was just watching it would bother me, so I want to explain it to you. If you haven't noticed already, none of my thread matches my fabric. And there's two reasons. One is I do have a thread that matches somewhat, but the thing is that threads come in different widths. And the thread that I have that somewhat matches it, and I say somewhat because, you know, I have modeled colors, it's too thick for a fine needle. I have to use a size 9 needle in my sewing machine. And if I use my very thick multi-purpose type thread in there, it's going to constantly break because the eye of the needle on a 9 is just too small for it. So instead I had to find the closest thing I could find for that, which is a darker green. And of course that shows up really, really well. But it is the right diameter that'll go through my size 9 easily. So since I'm going to be over dyeing this whole thing anyway, I'm not really stressed about it. I just wanted to point out to you why. All right, so this is what we have so far. Pockets, you know, box pleats. I need to open up these, but box pleats. I have not finished off these edges because I'm going to be waiting to do those, but here is the sleeve with the elastic in it. The back has just the seam going up the back, and she's pretty much ready to move on to the skirt. Okay, so the next part I'm going to be working on is the skirt back. And up the center of the back, I'm going to be sewing it at 5/8. After I sew it, I'm going to come back and serge that seam. I'm not touching the other parts yet. However, just because this fabric being what it is and everything like that, I am going to put my stay tape across this edge just to make sure it doesn't stretch out of shape before I get a chance to sew it onto the bodice, because we still have to do pockets and things like that, and so it's going to be handled a lot, so that stay tape's going to help me keep my sanity. Okay, so I actually used my 1-inch tricot tape instead of the Sokeys E tape. I think that it's going to give it enough stability. And I wanted the tape to be a little bit wider so that when I do sew, I'm going to overlap on here, and I can do that with the tricot. So now what I'm going to do is get my skirt front pieces. Just ripped my instructions. I don't sew them together, but I am going to go ahead and put this tape at the very top of my 2 front pieces. And actually, okay, so I'm just changing my mind again. I'm actually going to come back and I'm going to put this also down this row, and that is because I'm going to be having pockets going in here, and this is a very finicky kind of fabric, and I want that pocket line to stay as smooth and finished as possible. So if I can put this down this line where all of that strain where the pocket's going to be can be sewed on there nicely, I think that's really going to help. So before I do my front piece, I'm going to put it down both sides of my back, and then on my front piece, each one separately, I will do the top and down that side. Okay, so here is one of my front pieces. Now I went ahead and put a tape down the straight because I'm going to be sewing that placket piece on here where the buttons go. This, of course, to keep it from stretching out of shape, and this because one, it's cut on a bias, so danger, and also because that is where my pockets need to go. And so I want to stabilize it for that. So I got all of my skirt pieces all taped up. And before I go any further, what I'm going to be doing is serging around the edges of all 4 of these pocket pieces. And that is just because I don't want them to fray at all. All right, so I've got my pockets serged, and I just want to show you something really quick. this is the dot for the top of the pocket, and that's my matching dot on my pattern. And you can see that if you match those up, it lines up top to top. So because of that, I am not going to actually be marking those dots on here. It's kind of self-explanatory, but I will keep my pattern pieces handy in case I need to refer back to them. So before I pin my pocket pieces on here, I'm actually going to come back, and now that I have this tape on here, it's going to make it a lot easier. And I'm going to serge the edges of this all the way up to this point. I'm not serging the top. I don't need to right now, but I am going to be serging just the outside sides. So of the back piece, both of the sides, and of the front piece, the bias cut side. Okay, ignore this big splotch O color there. Again, it's a free-form shade. That's what this dress is. It's free-form. So anyway, on the bias cut side of the front and on the backs, I am going to be going ahead and pinning and stitching my pockets. And I'm pinning it to the right side. And I'm going to be sewing it at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So a little bit narrower than our standard seam allowance. All right, so I've got these sewn on, and I want to let you know, if you're ever doing this and you have one side that's reinforced, the other side that's not, if when you're sewing it, you put the side that's reinforced up, that way, because the one that's not is going to want to stretch, okay? If you do that, sew it this way, then as you hold it tight, the feed dogs can ease in anything, and it's going to be a lot easier to sew it this way than it is to sew it this way. But that aside, this is my outside now, my pockets. So what I'm going to do is, with the seam allowances pressed towards the pocket here, okay? I'm going to come back and understitch it, which means I'm going to be running a row of stitching on this side. So here's my seam, just on this side, about 1/8 of an inch in. I'm going to run a row of stitching that's going to attach this pocket piece to the seam allowances underneath, and I'll do that for all 4 pocket pieces. Okay, so here you can see my understitching holding that pocket flat. So now I have my back piece down here. Let me move you up. This is my back piece, and I'm going to place my front right on top of it, matching up these seams up here and down here. Let me go ahead and pin that, and I'll show you how to stitch it. So now I had my pocket pattern piece handy. Ignore how it's stretched out here. That's just, you know, life with gauze. But anyway, I have these 2 marks here, and I'm going to transfer those now. I'm lining it up with my stitching line. I'm putting one up at the top and one down here. So the way that I'm going to be sewing this, and again, the length that I made, it has like a short version that's kind of rounded and a long version that's flat. I basically made about halfway in between these two. So mine is flat at the bottom, but it's about 9 inches shorter than what this is. So what I'm going to do is, from the very top, I need to sew down to this dot, okay? And it'll be sewing on that side of the stitching, because this is going to be 5/8 from this edge, okay? So all of the stitching we did, the stay stitching and everything, is going to be on this side. It'll be hidden, okay? So then I'm going to come back up here, and starting on this side, it's not necessary to go up here. I'm going to come all the way down, and again at 5/8 all the way around here. So when I'm coming up here, I'm going to come up and aim for that dot, again, on this side of all the stitching, and then go straight down all the way to the end of the skirt. So it's first here, and then all around to here, and then straight down. All right, so I am ready. Hang on, how come I can't get this higher? Let me try this. All right, so I'm ready to go ahead and press this pocket towards the front. So I'm going to make sure that all of this is nice. This seam here is nice. Now I want to press this towards the front. At this point here, I'm going to be making a little clip like that so that I can open up this seam allowance, and from this point down press that open. So let me go press on both sides, the pockets towards the front. Now up here at the top, let's see if they ask you to do it. Well, they ask you to baste it. When you get it moved over there to the top, I'm going to go ahead and pin these right now. And the directions ask you to baste it. I'll probably just put a couple little hand stitches up there just to hold it in place. Alright, so I've got the pockets set in. Everything is pressed in here. My seam allowances are pressed open below. And you can see the pockets laying nice and flat. And all that stitching is hidden in here on the inside, just like we want it to. Now I'm getting ready to go ahead and attach the bodice to the top. Now, across the bottom of the bodice, I have not put tape. And that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and serge, I guess, the bottom of it. I haven't decided yet. But as long as at least one side has the tape, one side knows what's going on, I can ease the other side to it. It's just when you have a fabric that's just blah everywhere, and nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing, it's hard to match up two things that don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So, since at this point the skirt is the well-behaved one, I'm going to ease the bodice bottom edge to this. So if that makes any sense. So with my top here, like I just said, I'm not going to be putting the tape here, but before I attach it to the skirt, I am going to run it up this center front, because I already have it run up the center front here, because that's where I'm going to be sewing my big buttons placket and everything. So it's just a couple strips down this center front, and then we'll match it up to the skirt. Alright, so I have the bodice, which is up here, pinned to the skirt, which is down here. And you can see that there are places where the bodice is stretched out, you know, but since we have the tape here, we can ease this stuff in here. And so the way I'm going to sew this is with this side up, so the feed dogs can work in all that extra as I sew it. Just holding it a little bit firmer up here, it'll work it in. It'll work it in. And I wanted to also point out at the seams, I have the skirt part, the seam allowance pointing towards the front. The bodice part, I have the seam allowance pointing towards the back. And what that's kind of going to even out that bulk so they're not all on one side or all on the other. So I have it that way on the sides and on the back. You can see the seam allowance is this side and this side. So that way it evens it out. So I'm going to go ahead and sew it. Now it asks to sew it at a 7/8 inch seam allowance. The main thing to make sure is that your seam is underneath your buttonhole, because this has to be above it so that we can thread the drawstring through it, which I still need to make. So as long as I'm at about an inch here, so as long as you're 7/8 to an inch, you should be under the buttonhole, but if you get a little bit wonky when you get to the end, just make sure you're underneath that. Alright, so here's my seam, and what I need to do now is trim the bodice part, not the skirt part, just the bodice part. Trim it down to about a 1/4 inch all the way around. Just do a couple more inches here. Okay, so then once I have that all the way around, what I'm going to need to do is come up and fold this up, tuck the top edge under, just barely. You know what? I'm not even going to tuck that edge under. I'm just going to serge it because I don't want to add any extra bulk. And then I'm going to stitch that at the top. And what that's going to do is make a casing for this little buttonhole. Oh, I didn't cut that open yet. I need to cut this buttonhole open before I stitch this over it, because that could be bad. So let me go ahead, cut this buttonhole, trim the seam allowance on the bodice side, serge this side, press it down, and then I'm going to just run a row of stitching straight across the top here to hold it into place. So this is what my waistband on the inside is looking like. I have this edge serged, and then I did a row of just regular straight stitching there, this stitch here was my first seam that I did. And yeah, that is done. I have a little bit overlapping that buttonhole, but you know what? I think it's big enough I can put my drawstring through, so I'm not going to sweat it. There's a elastic guide here in the pattern, so I went ahead and I cut a 1/2 inch elastic according to that guide, and going to go ahead and thread it all the way through this casing, and hope for the best. So it looks like there's going to be both a drawstring and elastic going through this little casing. So this is skipping a little bit ahead, but I couldn't stop thinking about these straps, the drawstrings. So I made one. You know, you're supposed to have 2 lengths, sewing them together and turning them. I made one, and I made it, you know, to their sizes and everything. And it looks like if I push it really, really hard, it's going to go through, but it still seems awful thick. So this is my 1980s vintage spaghetti strap turner, because that's what I need for something this long and this narrow. So you just kind of smush the whole thing over the pipe. And I know they have modern versions of this. Not exactly the same, but they're close. But anyway, there's this little pointy wire that goes in the bottom, and I bend the top over, and the wire has a little screw so I can turn it, and it comes out. And carefully feed the fabric in the top as I'm pulling down on the bottom. And as soon as I can get that little tip to pull out the bottom, then I'm home free. It's when I get almost all the way out and it comes off that's a pain. But we're getting there. But I just have to be patient and just take it a little bit at a time. There it is. Okay, so we won. So I can untwist my little wire holder here. And now just with my hand, I can pull it out the bottom. And that's how you turn big, long spaghetti straps. Okay? Now, I think that this width will work. And the way I sewed it, well, I'll show you on my serger. I have a piece that's roughly about 1 inch. Here it's about 1.25 inches. Here it's about 1.5 inches. You know, you get the idea. Wide, and I'm folding it in half and ironing it so I have a nice sharp edge all the way down. Okay, so this is my folded edge, and I'm going to put it under my foot with that folded edge right at the edge of the presser foot. Okay, so once it gets started, I'm just going to run the whole thing and just using the edge of this foot as a guide. And that's what gave me the correct width to be able to fit inside of that little bitty casing. Alright, so it's time to get started with this piece here. What are they even calling it? Center front band. They're calling it a front band. Now I'm going to be using my 2-inch black woven stabilizer on it. It's very, very soft. It's not stiff like an interfacing, but because it's woven, it's going to give me the stabilization, that's the word, that I need from it. Okay, so I have it fused on there, and I just want to talk about this tape for a minute. I could have cut a nice long strip of regular fusible interfacing and put it on here. That's a very viable option. You know, make sure it's the right weight for your fabric. This, I used it because, one, it is easier because it's already, you know, cut. It's the woven that I want. But also, I can make sure it has 2 very straight edges. And on a fabric like this, where cutting it, you know, was approximate, but It is gauze, so you get some of that stuff. By having this on here, I have 2 guaranteed straight edges that I can use as a stitching guide, more so than using the edge here. And I can follow that, and it's going to give me a nice straighter edge that I can sew on. This is a lightweight. I've used it in waistbands when I want a nice soft waistband, not a crisp one. And it's a very good stabilizer all over the place. And you can see from the outside, it's not really visible, so it's nice. I think I bought this roll on the BodiceBespoke.com website. They have something similar in the Waywalk catalog, there's their website. But, you do you. That's just why I've decided to use this. Alright, so one other thing. I want to show you how I'm matching this up, because the last thing I want to do is end up with one side a little bit shorter than the other. So down here where I have my casing, I have everything lined up at this point, and I've put a little clip here just to hold it steady. Now I am going to just kind of smooth everything together, the 2 bodice pieces here, okay, this interfaced piece and this interfaced piece. I'm just kind of laying them all together and smoothing them all out, and now I'm going to lay it down flat here just to see where everything lines up, because I don't want one to be higher than the other. So it looks like if I take this piece of interfacing down, you can see it better. Just lining up these, and these are the ones with the tape fused to it. Okay, I just smooth those out. It looks like one of them, is about 1/4 inch higher than the other one. Okay, that's because life happens. So at this point, I am going to clip it down here so they're even, okay? And just easing that out. Then I'm going to bring this piece up, pin it up to the top up here, all the way through both of them. Flip it over and bring this side all the way up. Alrighty. So now I think everybody is smooth, everybody is together, and you can see everything's slightly different. I have one side that's slightly higher, one side that's slightly lower. So it takes a little longer to go through this double checking process, but it's going to save you a lot of grief later. So once I know where things should be matching up, I'm going to go ahead and stick my pins there so that when I sew it, it's going to end up right, and then I can turn this and everything's going to be fine. This one, it's a little higher. I'll just trim that after I'm done sewing it. And then the bottom, because you're going to a hem on the bottom, and I am anticipating that I'm going to have to let this kind of sit and stew and think about itself overnight, because the fabric is a little wonky. It's kind of like when you cut a big bias cut skirt and it just needs to rest overnight to figure out who it is. Okay, it's the same thing here. So if I'm going to pull these down and this side ends up a little lower than the other and the other one ends up a little higher than the other, I'm really not going to worry about that too much. And you can see here, my skirt's lower than this piece. That's okay. By the time I go ahead and make the hem, it's not going to be noticeable. But it's the same thing where I'm just kind of taking my time, smoothing it in, getting everything working together and happy. Then I'll pin it, and then I'll stitch it. So I have it sewn down. Now what I need to do is come back in here, and where this elastic is poking through, I'm going to trim a lot of that out because it's just extra bulk in here, just like that. Now if this was bothering me, I could go in and trim this out so it's more like a graded finish. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that because I am going to be putting buttons and buttonholes in here, and I do want it to be smooth, and this stuff is rather bulky. So what I'm going to do is the, not the band, but the garment side, I'm going to be trimming this down to just under 1/4 inch all the way up, and then there'll be the other piece that sticks out a lot further, so that's going to make it flatter for me. Then after I have that done, pressing these seam allowances over towards the band, going to come back in here and understitch just on this side, understitching through those seam allowances down here. All right, I think there's something wrong with the instructions. Just saying, because it's pretty clear from all of their close-up stuff over here that what they're trying to do is get you to sew that one seam, okay? Well, actually, this one doesn't show too well. No, it'll show. So they want you to sew that one seam, fold it out, and understitched it, okay? So we've done that. And then it shows here where you just turn the front band to the inside and press. And they're showing your understitching right there on the edge, which usually means that this understitching is right there at the edge, right? Right. So if that was the case and this understitching was right there, what do you see? You don't see a band, but you do see a little gap between your buttonhole and the edge, right? Right. Okay, so let's go over here. They have a better close-up for the jumpsuit version. It should be the same type of band, but they have a better close-up. So here they're showing you have your little buttonhole thing that your drawstring comes through. You have the gap between that and the edge, but then you have your band there, which makes more sense. You should have the band there, and that was my whole problem. So I think that this is messed up. Based on the directions for the jumpsuit side, it looks more like we should be able to have the buttonhole, a little space, and then a band. Now, unfortunately, I already have my understitching there, and it's going to show, so, you know, it's not the end of the world, but there it is. But what I'm going to do is this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make the best of this, because I already trimmed off my side, and honestly, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and just serge this side nice and tight, so it's not going to fray, okay? And then I'm going to fold it so that it comes just past where all that stitching is and pin it securely. All right, and then from the top, I'll have it so my pins are sticking out, and then from the top, I'm going to come back and I will top stitch it, try to go over this line again, and maybe one in the middle. I'll see how it goes, and that way I'll end up with the band, and everything will be secure. But just so you're aware when you're doing it, I think they've screwed up their instructions on that band. You know, I may be reading this totally wrong, but that's what it looks like to me. So let me go serge this, press it, pin it, and I'll be right back. All right, so just to double check myself, I went ahead and got out the pattern for the band. And if I match up the shoulder with the shoulder matching point, and just, you know, generally work my way around, it does come, see this 16 notch there? That should be where the edge is, okay? So I think I'm on the right track by doing it this way and not doing it this way. So just a heads up, keep an eye out for that. Hi. All right, so I am back. Fresh perspective. Have you ever just gotten frustrated with a project and just had to walk away because You could tell that you weren't going to be doing your best on it because you were so frustrated. And that's where I was getting with this thing. But I'm better now, you know, as you do. So I wanted to show you how I have this pinned together. Here, let me just turn this down. So I have it pinned so that on the outside I can see all of my pins. And on the inside, I've made sure that my serged edge comes way over the stitching line. I'm going to be looking at it from this side. So say if I stick my pin through this stitching, okay? That's where it's coming up. That might make more sense because I'm going to be looking at it from the outside edge. So from the inside edge, if everything goes according to plan, you know how that turns out sometimes, but that's the plan, is to go ahead and restitch where this row is, catching all of that, and then coming back and also doing another row of stitching at the very edge. It'll give a nice double top stitched look, and I think it'll round it out, and that's how I'm going to be doing both of the front edges. Alrighty, so with that band sewn together as it is, I'm going to be going on to the neckband. Now at this point, it's kind of like a bad relationship where I've lost faith in the motivations of the instructions of this pattern. So I am not even going to try to follow their instructions for the neckband because just at first glance it looks like that terrible version of instructions that is very difficult. So I am going to put it together the way that I want to. Now the first thing is the interfacing that I'm going to be using. It is the lightest fusible Pellon interfacing out there. Okay, very light. I don't want anything super stiff because those corners of those neckbands are terrible to deal with when it's really stiff. Now usually when I am fusing interfacing onto a piece, the first thing I do is iron my base fabric out really, really well so there's no wrinkles or anything. Obviously I'm not going to be doing that with this one. So what I'm doing is I'm just placing my interfacing with the fusible side down, okay? And I'm going to try to form my fabric to the shape of the interfacing. Like there. I need to bring this edge down some. Like that. Maybe bring it up a little bit. There you go. And I think that's about as close as I'm going to get. So I'm going to start in the middle. I have my steam iron here. And I'm just going to touch it and hold it in the middle. Lift it up. Do the same thing over here. Trying to be very careful not to move my iron around because I want to retain those bumps underneath that fabric or on the fabric. And because this is a very thin interfacing, it fuses very quickly. Okay, so there is my one piece. Now I'm going to get my other. Okay, put it on top here, and I am going to sew it all the way, starting at the very edge, up, all the way over. But I'm going to be stitching this at 3/8 all the way around. Okay, so now here's my interfaced side and my regular side. And I'm going to consider my interface side as the side that the world sees. This is going to be my private side here. So I am going to understitch this, which means because we understitch where it's private, so I'm going to push all of these seam allowances over to this side, and I'm going to be making my understitching line just on this side of our seam. Okay, so you can see my understitching over here. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and fold it in half and press it so it's nice and as flat as I want it to be, you know, gauze and everything, but as flat as I want it to be. And since I have a smaller seam allowance, I'm not actually going to be grading this. I know that goes against just about everything I always do, but I just don't feel like adding any chance of this stuff to fray on me. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cut off these little pieces at the ends that can stick out and just confuse my matters here. So now I have my collar band all ready to sew onto my outfit. Now I'm going to do it inside out from what the directions say. I'm going to sew the inside first so that when we turn it, we can top stitch it on the outside. And I think that that's going to work a lot better. All right, so this is my band piece. And on my band that I have sewed together, this is the inside, and it has the understitching showing here. I have marked the center back, and this point here, which is where my shoulder line is going to be, I've marked those. And then on the inside, I'm going to be sewing this at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, okay? And so I'm put a mark 3/8 up, straight across there, and then straight down the line, so I have an X. And I'm going to need that for placement, and I've done the same thing over here on this side. The inside here, I'm going to match up with my center back to center back, like that. My shoulder mark to the shoulder. Okay, and then way up here at the very front, 3/8 inch up here. Okay, let's see where that is. Oopsie, I have this thing turned around. All right, 3/8 is right here. Now I am going to need to match that point up with where this X is. All right, so I'm going to stick a pin right in the middle of that X, and that is going to match up right here. So I'm going to go ahead and pin up on top. Now it's going to stick out a little bit. That's okay. That doesn't bother me at all that this part sticks out. That's just fine, because where we're sewing is right there, and that's going to end correctly. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, make sure that I can still kind of see my mark. Make sure my mark is right up where that seam crossing is, right there. Okay, so on the inside it's right there. All right, so now with the rest of this, I just need to kind of ease it down and ease it in. But the glorious part about doing it this way is if while you're easing it in, you get a little bit of a pucker or something, it's not going to show because it's going to be on the inside. And because this side doesn't have the interfacing on it, it's a little more flexible. You know, it's a little more workable and moldable, so I can kind of push it down to where I need it to go. And I'm just going to put enough pins in here that I need it to do what it's going to do. See, I can just kind of smush it down in there. And I'm going to do that all the way around, making sure that the other side is matched up exactly like this side. Okay, so I have it all pinned on here. Now when I sew it, remember this side, you can't actually see it, but the stay tape is actually fused onto my fabric here. So this side is a lot sturdier than this side because it has no stabilizer on it at all. So when I sew it, I am going to sew it with the garment side up, the band side down, so that I can ease in all of this, because at the very front where that major curve is in the neckband in the front, there's a lot of ease to work in there, and I want to use those feed dogs to my advantage, so I'm going to start there and work all the way around. Okay, so now this is the inside, and you can see where my band was sewn on. It's nice and flat, you know, I don't see any puckers, which is good. That's just some of my woven stay tape peeking out, but that's fine. So now what I'm going to need to do is, this is the outside edge. I want to come back in here and clip, you know, every inch or so along here. And now I'm only clipping part way. I'm stopping about 1/8 of an inch at least away from my stitching line because I don't want it to go through. But I want to be able to press this so that it's going to lay nice and flat before I fold the other side of my band over. So by clipping it like this, some of these pieces can overlap. So let's say I have it here and I take it to my ironing board. I can just, or even honestly, I can just hand press it. If I hand press all of this up, you know, some of these pieces are going to start to overlap. It's going to make a nice flat space. Okay, so now I can just fold this down, tuck the end up. I want to cover up my first line of stitching, but not by too much. Put a pin right there where I want it to be, and just do that all the way around. And that way I can come back, starting in the center back, sew that direction, and everything is exposed, so I can make sure my top stitching is just the way I want. So I'm starting, I did my center back, now I want to show you this side. So here is our big bulky corner, okay? I'm going to turn it in like that, fold this side up, and this side down. And there you go. And pin that. Now, this is very, very fat right here. We have a lot of layers there. So you do not start stitching there. That's why we start stitching in the middle here. Okay, because we can get a good running start, come all the way. And when we get to the edge, we're just going to fly straight off the edge, pull the threads out, tie them in a knot, and then with a needle, bury them back through. Okay, so my neckband is all pinned. Once again, I'm going to go sew it, but I start here, go off to this side, and I am going to be going, just, you know, close to the edge, less than 1/8 of an inch around this edge here and around this edge here. When you get to the end, don't back up. Just keep going all the way off, and when you cut your thread, cut it so you have, you know, a long enough tail you can tie. Okay, so here's my neckband, and it's stitched around the edge, and I was able to do it nice and smooth. Now the second half of sewing it is a little trickier than the first because you have to kind of wedge half of your dress underneath the arm of the sewing machine, but it's doable, and honestly it's a lot easier than doing it the alternative method. Now on the inside, sometimes I'm perfect, sometimes I'm just barely off, but you know what? That doesn't matter. Nobody's going to see it. This is the side that they see, and from this side, everything is grand. So I continued stitching off the edge, so they're really twisted up right here. So what I am going to do is just thread these ends through a needle. Just going to thread my 2 ends through a needle, go to the inside, stick it under, and pull it through, and that just kind of buries those threads in there, and then I can clip them, and everything is nice and safe. So if they weren't twisted up, and you can also, here, if they're not twisted or you don't feel that secure about them, you can always just tie a couple knots, and I'll do that with this side just to see. So I tie one this direction, I tie one the opposite direction, so I get a tiny little square knot down there, and then do the same thing. So now I believe the next step is marking for buttons and buttonholes. I have 7 buttons that I can use going down the front. which is less than what they call for, but they have them going all the way up here, and I don't have any intention of buttoning this button, okay? So if this is my bust, I have one up here just slightly above, and then I have them spaced every 5 inches. At this point here, this is where that drawstring is supposed to come here and tie. If it doesn't look like that drawstring is going to hold it well enough, I'll put a little hook. Actually, I might put a little hook and eye right underneath there anyway, because there's that elastic and everything, and that way it'll hold it from wanting to pull apart, because I don't want it to want to go off to the side like that. But I think if I put a button here, 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 and here, I'm going to be just fine. So I will be going back to my treadle. You don't need to see it again, but I'm going to be putting my buttonholes going up and down, going vertically, centering it at that point. And then I'll come back, sew on the buttons, and put the drawstring through here. Hi, welcome to the next day. So last night it was stormy and everything, and I was up late, and you get these crazy ideas when you're up late, and I decided I'm going to go ahead and dye this dress now. And I found some old turquoise dye in the back of one of my drawers, and threw it in a bucket with some salt and stuff, and put my dress in there and let it sit overnight. This morning I rinsed it out, ran it through the washer and the dryer, and it looks very organic. So that's what we're going with. I could either go with organic or hot mess, and I decided I'm going with organic, because you can see I've got all kinds of different shades of green going through here. It's kind of like a tie-dye effect, but not. But you know what? I would rather go with that than hot mess, except for there's this one part. I don't know how this happened, but on the very back, there's a brown spot right here. Now, it's actually a lot lighter now, and it might actually lighten up with a few more washes. But at first, it looked like a big dark brown burn or something, so I don't know how that happened. But anyway, we're going forward. So right now, what I need to do is sew on my buttons, and I have my buttonholes all cut open. And so what I've done is just pinned my dress closed at the very top, right here in the middle, so that these elastics match, and then at the bottom, so that way my plackets can kind of overlap. And I am just going to go through, and in the very center of my buttonholes, I'm putting a little red erasable mark, just running that side by side to mark my buttonhole placement. There's all kinds of ways to do this. I have one of those Expando buttonhole markers, but honestly, I don't think that really works for me. I've tried using it several times, and I just don't. It's good for estimating. It's good for estimating about how many buttons you're going to need for something, but as far as getting really accurate, it seems to wiggle a little bit. So anyhow, now you can see I have my little dots, so I'm going to go ahead, sew my buttons on. Okay, so I have the buttons sewn on, and now I'm trying to pull the drawstring through my little casing, and I gotta tell you, it's a little bit tight. You know, so far so good. We're just making slow progress, but because the elastic is in there already, and it's a little bit wrinkly, it's a little bit tight, but we can do it. Alright, so this is what we have right now. I got the buttons on, got her tie through. Now let me open up this tie. It's still a little damp. I didn't dry the tie out completely. But you can see, here's the elastic. Here's that button just on top of the elastic where they wanted it, but it's pulling it open here. And I don't like that, so I'm going to put a hook and eye just below that elastic, right down here. And that way I have a button on top, and I'll have a little black hook and eye just below. The hook will be on this part, the eye on this part. Right, so I'm sitting down here on the floor so you can see what my bottom edge looks like right now. And like I said, I ran it through, come here honey, the washer and dryer. So it's a little bit frayed on the bottom, but because part of this is bias cut and everything, it's a little bit different levels. Doesn't really bother me too much because this is a very gauzy, flowy type of a fabric. But because of this, I am going to do a little bit of leveling, and then when I hem it, I'm going to hem it up with some lace to try to give it a nice soft edge. So first things first, let me get my hem marker, and I'll show you how I'm going to level it out. Now before I attach my marker, I want to make sure that my waistband is fairly level, because this wants to go either up and down on my dress form, and that way at least I have some kind of a uniform spot to start, and I think it's pretty good. So let me go ahead and get my marker. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is find the shortest part of the skirt, and that looks to be right about here. This is the back, and so this is my marker. It's got its little base, and I am going to lower, this is the point where I'm marking, I'm going to lower this to where it is pretty close to where that point is. Right about there, right about there. So if I was to stick a pin, what you do is you use your back of your clamp, your front of your clamp, you just put your fabric in the middle and close it, and there's a little slot, you stick your pin there and it marks it. Okay? So what I'm going to do then is just leave everything as it is and slowly move my marker around and just keep putting little pins all the way around. Then I can come back and cut this along the line that my pins are making, and that way I will end up with a skirt that's all a uniform length. Alright, so for hemming this, I am going to be using stretch lace, which I love. Now this circumference around the bottom of this very, very round skirt is about 120 inches, which is about 3 yards and a foot. And this little package of tape is only 3 yards, so I'm just going to use this little scrap to make up the difference. I think it's close enough that it'll be fine. So the way that I'm going to do this is, if you haven't seen it before, this stretch lace, and this is a very old package, of course, but it's the same stuff today as it was then. When was this made? 1969. Huh, interesting year. Okay, so what you do is there's 2 tracks. There is a upper stripe and a lower stripe, and what you do is you sew inside that track. So because this is a rounded curve, I'm going to use the stretch in this lace to help me form that curve. So I'll show you. When I start sewing, actually I'll be doing it on the other side. Hang on a second. Alright, I would start on this side actually. What I'm going to be doing is letting it stick out about in ½ an inch or so, and start sewing with the fabric about halfway in the lace, okay? So I anchor it and get started, and as I sew, I'm going to stretch it. Sew a little bit, stretch it, like that all the way around. And what that's going to do is it's going to build in some ease here in this edge, and since it's curved, I'm going to use that so when I fold it, it's going to fold up nicely. So let me get this started, and again, I will be sewing right inside this little stripe all the way down, and I'll show you what it looks like before we fold it up. Alright, so I actually had enough lace to go around with all the stretching. I made up for that extra space, and I had, about 9 inches left over. So as you can see, I can just kind of softly fold it up, and the ease in this lace is going to allow me to just make it a nice smooth hem up here with the top of the lace. Now, I decided I'm not going to press this. I'm going to leave it a soft edge. I think that'll work with this fabric, and I'm just going to come back and catch stitch the this top row of the stretch lace here. I'm just going to do it by hand all the way around, so it's not really obvious on this side. hopefully. And we're just going to call that good. Okay, so this dress, I went from I like it to I'm mad at it to I'm just getting through it to I like it again, and the color turned into kind of a streaky algae green, which was not what I was planning, but I kind of like it. It's a very, I think I used the word organic, but for a gauze, a light, untight fitting, unstructured, sleeved and everything top. Sorry, my cat again. I think that it works. I do. So the pros are extremely comfortable. I mean, look at this. There is no fit up here. And having the bodice be like one huge piece from the sleeve down, nothing's going to be sticking. And especially if you make it out of gauze or something like that, it's going to be nice and comfy for hot, sticky weather, which is good. Now, the con, stop it, cat. The con was the instructions for this front band. That was the thing that almost pushed me over the edge because it seemed very conflicting. But just take my word for it. It's a band. It's not a facing, and go with it, and that's fine. And I would suggest doing the neckband, not the way the instructions say in the pattern. Instead, either do it my way or some alternative way, because otherwise it'll just be more difficult. Neckbands are tricky as they are, and it'll be more difficult. So there you go. But I actually think it's going to be one of my go-to summer dresses. Honestly, it's very comfortable. The elastic in the waistband is a good thing. I was questioning the elastic plus drawstring thing. And if you make the drawstring as narrow as I say, they both fit in the casing. And the elastic gives it enough structure that the drawstring isn't flopping. So it's a good thing. I like that. So anyhow, hope you like the video. And sorry about messing up the pockets, but it's a pocket. I'm going to consider this a design option. So you have the option of doing it the pleat in the front way or the box pleat my way. So anyway, see you later. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn, then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses, the view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.